Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst. He's chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What is your reaction to this most recent fighting yesterday and where we are in this war?
Well, certainly Israel is bracing for a retaliation attack by the Iranians directly, but also because of the Hezbollah leader who was killed. It's likely Hezbollah is going to participate in this. Whether they can synchronize a coordinated attack remains to be seen. It likely may come in two waves as opposed to what we saw the last time. And the Iranians, they've got to rethink what they did back on April the 13th, because the drones that they launched gave 4 to 5 hours early warning, given the distance it takes to travel to get to Israel. And the United States, Britain, France, and Jordan all had their fighters up waiting to receive those drones and destroyed almost all of them. And it certainly gave early warning to the missiles that were about to come as well, and gave the Israeli air defense systems, plenty of time to get set for that. And on top of that, 50% of the missiles that Iran fired malfunctioned. So certainly they have got to correct the mistakes they've made. And I think they're going to try to present a greater challenge to the Israelis, I would imagine, as a result of this. But look, good news here. The U.S. coalition is in place to do exactly what they did the last time. We've got U.S. military people in Israel's operations center, so to make certain that if extra capability is needed, we got our thumb right on that to provide it, and also to share intelligence together. I think the Israelis, the U.S.-led coalition, are ready for this. They've got naval ships in place. We moved an F-22 fighter squadron, in addition to the numerous air power assets that we have in the region. And our Arab friends, they will provide the early warning as they did the last time. They don't advertise it, but as soon as their radars and sensors see the launches coming out of Iran, they will notify the Israelis and the United States what's happening.
Well, look, then there's this Pakistani man with ties to Iran who's been charged with plotting to assassinate former President Trump and other politicians. The DOJ says he traveled to New York in April to hire a hitman to carry out the assassinations later this month or early September. But one of the people he approached reported him and became an FBI informant. The Department of Justice now says that this assassination plot has no ties to the attack on Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Here's the White House's response.
I will refer you to DOJ, as it's an ongoing law enforcement investigation. We have said many times that we have been tracking Iranian threats against former politicians. We've been very clear about that. These threats arise from Iran's desire to seek revenge for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. We consider this a national and homeland security matter of the highest priority.
General, your reaction?
Well, the Iranians haven't given up, certainly, on a revenge attack and retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani by the Trump administration in January 2020, which really rocked the Iranian regime, because Qasem Soleimani was such an iconic figure. He brazenly traveled around the Middle East thinking he was, quote, untouchable, and that the United States would never go after him. And it had a huge psychological and emotional impact, actually, on the supreme leader and his regime. I always felt that when the Biden administration took over, given the significant impact of the Trump sanctions and the psychological and emotional impact of Qasem Soleimani being killed, that regime was really back on their heels. And what Biden should have done was strengthen that. It covered down on the sanctions, make sure there was no loopholes, and certainly not make concessions to him and ease up on the sanctions, which they did the first month they were in office, which was leading to their greatest strategic failure of the Biden administration, I believe, is their hands-off approach they have dealing with Iran. We would not be where we are today with all of these proxies operationalized and an axis of resistance trying to destroy Israel if the Biden administration had just strengthened what the Trump administration was doing, built on that success. And here we are, right in the middle of a Middle East war as a result of the hands-off policy dealing with Iran.
And that appeasement of Iran is similar to the lack of any response toward China. Now, General, all morning long, we're talking about Vice President Kamala Harris's new running mate, Tim Walz, and I want to get your take on his relationship with China to give us a sense of what that could mean should these two be in office. Tim Walz has praised communist China. He lived there. He taught there for a year. He visited China 30 times, even honeymooned there. He said this about China: there was no anti-American feeling whatsoever. He said, I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship. I totally disagree, he says. Meanwhile, a report by the Commission on the National Defense Strategy finds that the U.S. could lose a conflict with China and Russia in a global war unless significant changes are made to the National Defense Strategy. General, you're a commissioner who was appointed to both the 2018 and 2022 National Defense Strategy Commission, and you on this program, I want to say, honestly, 8 years, 10 years ago, you told us on this program that the U.S. Is not prepared and we need to put more money, resources in our military. And you pointed out here to us that the Chinese Navy is almost, it's bigger than the U.S.'s Navy. So should we expect a soft on China policy from Tim Walz should he get in as the vice president? What do you make of these comments on China, and where is that relationship going if we see a change with Kamala at the top of the ticket?
No, I don't get involved in candidates' policies because I don't want to have any influence over an election. But when it comes to China itself, look, I spent 2 years looking at this during the Trump administration, and 2 more years now. With the Biden Austin National Defense Strategy. And look at China has declared the United States an adversary. They want to dominate and control the region at the expense of the United States. They want to replace the United States as the world's leader, having global impact, and take our place in doing that. And clearly they want us to lose all of our influence regionally and globally as a result of those two goals and objectives. And when we look at the United States preparations for a war dealing with China, we're challenged to win. Indeed, we could lose. And we would likely, if we're at war with China, what we're saying is that it is likely that we would find ourselves in other theaters, Russia expanding or Iran expanding as well, and find ourselves in a global war. And we haven't faced anything like that since World War II. That's the challenge that is really in front of us. And I think it's the most serious and dangerous challenges we have faced in many, many decades. And the intelligence services of the United States have said the same thing in testimony before the Congress of the United States.
It's deeply concerning, General, and thanks for pointing it out so many years ago here. General, it's good to see you this morning, so thank you.